Hey there, soccer freaks. This is ATL On Fire, the podcast where we talk all things Atlanta United Football Club. So sit back, buckle up, enjoy. All right, everybody, thank you for coming back to the show. We are ATL On Fire. We know a little bit about the MLS. We know a good bit about Atlanta United, but we know a lot about soccer, and we're going to talk about it all. And we are thrilled to have an awesome guest on the show today. We've got the radio commentary, color commentary from 92.9 The Game, Jason Longshore. And, of course, I'm joined with Dave Katz, my co-host. And just want to say, Jason, thank you so much for making time and jumping on to answer a few questions for us.
No, thanks for reaching out. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. And in terms of how people can find you, you're on Twitter, you've got your own podcast. How can people find you online?
Yeah, Longshore on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm on Facebook a little bit, but not too much. Soccer Down Here is our show. We're live on Twitch most mornings at 9 o'clock or thereabouts. We have some other shows that go up as podcasts as well. You can subscribe via your favorite podcatcher, and a lot of Atlanta United, but not solely Atlanta United. We get into MLS, we get into soccer worldwide, whatever kind of strikes our fancy on a given show. You never know what we'll be getting into.
So you too talk about it all.
We try.
And, I've certainly read up on your history and being somebody who's just a big advocate of soccer here in the Atlanta community. I grew up in Roswell, as we've talked about in our podcast. And, if you could just give a brief kind of history of how you've come to be kind of the voice of Atlanta United soccer on the radio and your involvement and excitement around the team.
I mean, for me, a lot of right place at the right time. A lot of it comes down to my work with Soccer in the Streets. I worked with them for 10 years, nonprofit based in Atlanta that uses soccer to better the lives of disadvantaged kids and provide them access to not just playing, but also life skills that will benefit them on and off the field.
Yeah, we had a podcast about Soccer in the Streets with one of the board members earlier. So, yeah, our podcast listeners are big fans of Soccer in the Streets.
Very, very cool. They were around long before I was there and are still going really, really strong. It's awesome to see their success, and I try to help out wherever I can. But when I was there, the last big role I had was Chief Development Officer, and it coincided with the time that Atlanta United was getting started. We had a relationship with the Blank Family Foundation, funding relationship, but also just a best practices kind of relationship. They're such a great nonprofit that, gives a ton of money to a ton of different organizations all over the metro area, but also more than that, they try to help them in other ways as well. And we built a relationship as a soccer serving organization. And when Atlanta United started, it was something that they could lean on to kind of get things rolling and get out into the community and had, a ready and willing partner to work with. So got to know Darren, got to know Carlos when they both came to town. And when the radio deal came about, it was right before the home opener in 2017. I had done one of the preseason games over in Charleston for the ESPN coastal stations down in South Georgia and in Hilton Head. And when the deal was coming together, they reached out and wanted to hear the tape. And the Thursday before the Sunday home opener, I got the call that they needed a color commentator, and they offered me the role, and I haven't given it up since.
So podcaster to 92.9 The Game commentator. There's hope for us all.
It can happen.
Yeah, no, we definitely enjoy listening to you on, all the 92.9 The Game, shows are out there, Dukes and Bell and the morning show. I think you do a great job of bringing kind of Atlanta United information to the fans and appreciate the work that you do.
That brings me to, so obviously you were following soccer, podcasting about soccer before Atlanta United. And really before soccer was really popular in Atlanta. So I guess my first question would be, were you amazed by the support for Atlanta United, or did you expect it?
I expected it, but I thought it might take more time. I mean, I grew up playing in the Atlanta area. I worked for the Atlanta Ruckus back in the day when I was in college, the pro team that preceded the Silverbacks. I worked with the Silverbacks, first for soccer in the street stuff, and in the second version of the Silverbacks in the North American Soccer League. Did game days, helped run the reserve team. And so I was around it and I knew what it could be. And when Atlanta United launched, I think they did a couple of things that were really, really important. They didn't just try to appeal to the soccer community. They tried to appeal to the sports community in Atlanta. And I think Arthur Blank did something that was critical. And he didn't make Atlanta United, or even before they had a name, MLS Atlanta, he didn't make it feel secondary to the Atlanta Falcons. He put it as an equal. And I think that was a really important step, because when we get to travel and see other cities around the league, there's great soccer cities all over this country. I think the special thing about Atlanta is how welcoming it is to new fans, and how many fans, their first interaction with soccer is from Atlanta United. I think in a lot of other cities, it's people who grew up playing, maybe they're from other countries, maybe their parents played. There's long-time soccer cultures in some of these other cities, and there is here too. But there's also an influx of brand new fans who are excited because it's been fun. It's been a cool brand, and it has really brought the city together. And it's such a hard thing to replicate. And I think that the Charlottes and the St. Louis's and other cities that are getting into pro soccer have to try to figure out what that looks like in their community. But Arthur Blank and Atlanta United and just the city of Atlanta and the soccer fans in Atlanta have really done it the right way and helped grow the game by bringing new people to the party.
So it's obviously hard to replicate, but it's also very difficult to sustain. So do you think that the club is still doing things to keep the support, or are there things that they could be doing better to maintain the support?
I think once you get established, it's about winning. I mean, ultimately, that's going to be the most important thing. And I mean, even in the conversations we're hearing right now from people, a few years ago, there was a lot of talk about style and wanting the team to play a certain way. I think right now people just want to see, goals and wins. And ultimately, that's going to drive the success. I mean, it's just how professional sports are. I think in soccer, we always worry that fans are going to go away, because over the years they have. I mean, when you look at the old NASL and the way it was run, they couldn't sustain it because it was poorly organized and they didn't plant those seeds. Well, now you've got seeds planted. And I think for Atlanta United, to keep those new fans, it's going to be about winning games and winning trophies. I think the soccer fans that are here and are established, and those new fans that have turned into like hardcore fans like us, who will watch the Premier League and watch the league in Argentina and watch Mexico and, support all of it and get into all of it. I think they're hooked. And I think they're going to be the ones that are going to argue with us on podcasts about, what they like, what they don't like. Those fans aren't going away. I think it's the new fans and the casual fans. You have to turn them into the hardcore fans. And ultimately you do that through those experiences that we had in 2018 and 2019 with trophies and wins and celebrations.
We talked about some what I consider sort of second level of progression of being a fan. So for example, the initial crowd, everybody was standing, and now they're sitting a little bit, with the exception of the supporter section. Or are we even talk a lot about how the supporter section so vocal but haven't progressed to having individual chants about players? So how do you feel about that secondary culture that happens at a club that's been around a long time, that's about sustainable?
I think it's always kind of refreshing itself. And, I've been around the supporter culture a decent bit. I was around getting Terminus Legion started back in the day as everybody was figuring it out. I was more of a sounding board and helping connect it with soccer in the streets and giving back to the community. But it's hard because people who put their passion and their time and their energy into organizing these groups, they get burned out, and they can't do it, for decades upon decades. So then new
Right.
people come in, and it starts to take different spins. And I think sometimes it just takes time to gel. It's still a young supporters culture here in Atlanta, and I think everybody's out what Atlanta's spin is, and that's a hard thing to do because I've loved how getting to hear at most of the stadiums in the league. There's still a few of the new ones that we haven't seen yet. I think that Atlanta sounds like Atlanta. I think at times there's that reach to try to bring, simple things in to get more of the stadium like singing and chanting and joining in. And I'd love to see the supporters continue to go down those roads that make it unique.
How was the new Cincinnati venue that you were
Awesome.
at last Wednesday, right?
Awesome. Great stadium. Cincinnati's an underrated away day anyway. Like, I highly recommend, if you're looking for a trip to make next year, like pick the Cincinnati week if that's going to happen again, because it's a big city, but not giant. Like, there's cool stuff all over. It's some really cool history. The stadium's amazing. Like, it's a 26,000 seater.
Yeah.
So like there were 23,000 in there on a Wednesday night, and it was loud and intense. I love it. And I think Cincinnati is a couple years behind us in terms of what their supporters culture sounds like. I think the easy thing to do is to replicate chants you hear, like especially in the Premier League
Sure.
for English speaking fans. And I get it and I understand it. I love where it progresses past that, and you hear different teams, different fan bases, different cities sound like their city, or do something unique, or put their own spin on things. And I think Atlanta's done a pretty good job of that, and I think they can continue to go down that road even deeper.
Yeah, so Dave and I obviously aren't close to the club and the team as much as you are. There's obviously been a lot of talk after the Heinze firing. You've kind of seen the culture go through the shifts from Tata to Frank de Boer to the Glass era, now to Heinze and Rob Valentino. I'm just curious, like what is your do you have any opinion on how that's affected the overall culture of just the organization in the building, from like the equipment manager to whomever? And does the new VP play a big role in trying to shift maybe some of the things that weren't correct?
Yeah, I'll be curious to see the role of the new VP and how it might be different than that role's been in the past. And we really won't know until they get started, which won't be until next month. So I'm curious to see what that looks like. This past year has been a weird one because we haven't been around the team very much. I mean, even when we got to call games last year, we were on the third level of the bends, and we could not go below that when the players were on the field because of the different tiers and testing procedures and stuff. I mean, for example, to travel right now, we have to go through, not quite the full testing protocol that the league was doing in the past, but we have to go into the testing protocol to be able to travel with the team. So it's still kind of weird because there's still like, some pretty big boundaries because of protocols and stuff. I got the sense from talking to folks in Cincinnati that, a lot of the talk with Gabriel Heinze and training sessions being intense and the water thing and those kinds of issues weren't really the issues. I think there was a lot of respect that the players and staff and people around had for Gabriel Heinze as a coach. Like, actually his soccer ideas, they really liked it. He was passionate about it, and the team was well prepared, well coached. He put everything into it. I don't think there's any question about that. I think the problems that Heinze had were more of the managerial side as opposed to the coaching side. I think a lot of it was, understanding the American soccer culture and how managers or coaches have more media responsibilities than they do in some other countries. I don't think Gabriel really enjoyed that stuff. He didn't in Argentina, so he definitely didn't come here and have a 360 on it. And that's a problem. And things like the social media content we've seen increase since he was dismissed. And We've seen some of those like mic'd up segments that the social team has put out. We've seen those come back. We've seen more media availabilities, frankly. I mean, we've seen some of those things that weren't happening before. And it's always going to be hard to know exactly, because when he took over, there were more protocols that were blocking some of that stuff. I mean, last year, people, I think, got frustrated with social media when the team wasn't doing well. And maybe fans on the outside didn't understand that the social media team was very limited in what they could even go out to shoot. They had, like, I think one person who was eventually admitted into the protocol to be able to film stuff on practice days. But for the longest time, I mean, they had to stay away from everybody. This past year has been crazy to run professional sports, and it's just amazing that it's happened. And I'm really thankful that it has, because I think it's helped keep a lot of people, with some form of normalcy with these games going on. It did for me, just having games and having things to look forward to. It was big, but it had an effect on everything. And I think that, combined with Heinze really struggling to build those relationships, and maybe even not understanding the need to do it, and not really getting that how soccer in the United States is very different than in Argentina, it felt like a breath of fresh air. It kind of came over the group with Rob Valentino coming in, who has been there for a long time. He came in 2018 with Atlanta United 2. He's part of Frank de Boer's staff. He ended up becoming part of Gabriel Heinze's staff, which was not the idea. He was supposed to be in a separate role, but he ended up becoming part of the staff because of the respect that staff had for him and the work that he put in to help them. So, I mean, I think that says a lot about it, because, I mean, he had nothing to do with them before they got here, and they looked at him as one of the group. So I think the players immediately responded to him. I mean, we've heard him in the post-game comments and in the pre-game comments. He's really trying to rally this group, and I think he's made some subtle tweaks on the field as well. I hope that they get some wins. I hope they get some goals for him, because I know they're playing hard for Rob Valentino, and I know they want him to do well.
So we talked a lot about in the podcast about how we expected Atlanta United to be a selling club, in particular with this mode of buying young South Americans and selling them on. But I think, the idea, at least in our minds, was that for players, it might be a 2-year stopover on the way to Europe, but the continuity would come from the front office, from the coaching, and obviously not by any design. That really hasn't happened. And so I guess my question for you is, based on that experience, do you think that Atlanta United, in going after high-profile coaches who may not want to stay here long-term, whether that's a good idea? And what do you think that means for the next hire?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this hiring process is so different because it's mid-season, and results will be, I think, a bigger priority in the short term than they've ever been before. So, maybe that changes the list of priorities, of responsibilities, of what you're looking for. I'll be curious to see, who this next manager is going to be. I think you're on point with the idea about Atlanta United from the get-go. I think it was about being a club that would spend to bring in players, but would sell and bring in revenue that way and continue to grow it. When you look at the MLS rules and you dig into them a bit, if you sell players at profits, like it helps you with your salary cap. It's a very important tool to have to build a better and better team. I think they've done a little bit of that. They haven't done maybe as much as they would have liked. And Barco is probably the one that people will zero in on. That was a bold move to make going into 2018, to bring in a young player that a lot of European clubs were looking at. And he's had a lot of injuries, and he's had a lot of bad luck go against him. I hope that he continues to have a good Olympics. He's played well in his first 2 games, and I hope that a good opportunity comes for him, because he's getting towards the end of a contract, and it's probably best for that to happen at some point. But I don't know if the coaching aspect was intended to be part of the continuity. I think the front office was. I think the academy is. I think the second team is. And I do think you'll see first team guys that maybe are separate from that group. And I look at somebody like Anton Walks right now. Anton is a player who was here on loan in year 1. He missed the 18 and 19 years. and came back after his time at Portsmouth. And he's a different player, and I don't think he's a player who will get a big money transfer to Europe, but I think he's a guy who could be here for a long period of time and be some of that continuity. And I think you'll see academy guys be in that situation too. You know, not every academy player is intended to be a George Bello who will have that opportunity sooner rather than later to play in a big club in Europe. I think sooner, because I think he's been brilliant this last year, especially. But there's going to be academy players who come through and are, you know, I'm trying to think of the touchstones in MLS. A guy like Sean Davis with New York Red Bulls, who has been there for 6-7 years as captain, 28 years old. You know, a guy who's going to play, you know, hundreds of games for the club. A Kyle Beckerman at RSL. You know, guys like that I think are going to be that continuity. And we're still so young in it, you know, and there has been a decent bit of turnover. Those guys will emerge. I think Anton could end up being one of those guys right now.
So you see it more as an anchoring, you know, couple players as the other players come through rather than a coach, you know, like, so, you know, we talked about, for example, do you want to go out and get a young American coach or an MLS experienced coach who might be here more like 5 or 10 years as opposed to 2? But I think what you're arguing is maybe the players on the field, there could be a couple of players of more continuity.
Veteran like a Parkhurst and Lorenowitz that, you know, that was the formula that seemed to work with a lot of the younger talent that was obviously on the field as well in 2018.
Yeah, helped anchor it. I could see a coach be here longer. I mean, I could see that happening. I think for this hire especially, you're looking at somebody who fits the philosophy. And, you know, it's about controlling games. It's about wanting the ball. It's about attacking and being proactive rather than reactive. And I think you can do that in a bunch of different ways. And if the right hire now is somebody with MLS experience and somebody who might be here for, you know, more than 2 years, maybe in the 3-4 years kind of reign or even longer, great. I don't think they're hiring to hire somebody to be here for 10 years, but I don't think they're hiring to have somebody here for only 2 years either. You know what I mean? Like, I think it hasn't worked out with Tata, who was a special hire to get things off the ground.
Sure.
I don't get the sense that Frank was hired to be here for, you know, as short of a period as he was. I think he was intended to be here for longer. It didn't work out after, you know, we got into the pandemic, and it didn't work out after the MLS's back tournament. Heinze was probably more of a shorter term just because he's younger in his career, and that's how he worked generally. You know, 2.5 years is the longest that he's been anywhere in his career. So, you know, I think it depends on who's available and what direction they go right now.
I was surprised to hear Darren Eales on the on the television broadcast talking about how they're primarily focusing on just available coaches as opposed to even thinking about going in after the high profile bid or someone who's already under contract. Do you have any thoughts about that?
A few people have asked about that, and I think, to me, what I take away from that is that they want to get somebody in quickly. And if you're looking at trying to get somebody who is under contract somewhere, that's going to be a process. And sometimes it can be a long one to get them out of their contract. Or, you know, if they're in Europe, you're depending on what country you're in, you're either at the beginning of your preseason or you're getting ready for your season to start here very soon. So it's hard to get somebody who's in that situation, who's a head coach. I mean, maybe there's an assistant somewhere that you might be able to pry away. But to get somebody in the fastest, I think you're looking at guys who are currently available and can walk in the door. And, you know, there's some interesting names out there like that. I mean, Dome Tarrant is a name that I've mentioned a few times, who was at New York City and did very well. He was Pep Guardiola's assistant at Barcelona, at Bayern, at Manchester City. I think his time at New York City was the best the club's ever been. And I think he fits the style and the philosophy and the current roster. Gennaro Gattuso, if you're talking about a bigger name, you know, he had success at Napoli, and I thought the team played really hard for him there. I liked how that team looked. It's a team that I follow to a decent level in Serie A. Antonio Conte, probably not the fit for him. I don't think stylistically either. But there's some interesting names out there that are available right now that I think are of a really good level and good quality.
Well, you're talking big names, so that suggests that, you know, you're thinking along the lines that it will continue to be, you know, high profile coaches.
I think they want somebody who can come in and win. I think that's the idea, and that's just my speculation is I feel like with what Darren and Carlos have said and the roster that I do think is here when it's full strength, this is a team that can and should win, and I think they're going to hire somebody who is not coming in to learn on the job, but somebody who can win a game straight away.
I wanted to shift slightly the gears and ask you about commentary on the radio. Obviously, it's very difficult you have to describe so many things. So I wanted you to tell us about how you've adjusted to that, and also about balancing the focus as on the Atlanta United team versus being a little bit more impartial, and how you feel about that.
Yeah, it's funny. This is stuff that we talk about all the time, and I'll start from the radio versus TV side of it, because I've done work with ESPN Plus with Atlanta United 2 games, and I've done some college games that have been there, and it is a different feel. I don't think it needs to be maybe as different as it is at times in English language, because if you listen to a game in Spanish on the radio and you watch a game in Spanish on TV, it's not all that dramatically different. In English, it is. And I think the idea is that in English, you lay out a whole lot more. And I think there's a balance to be found with it. The times that I've done games with Kevin Egan, I think we found a pretty good in-between level where, we're into it. We're very descriptive. We're trying to give as much information as we can, but there's moments where the pictures speak for themselves, and you try to find that balance.
Yeah, I'm always wondering whether you need to tell people they're going left to right, or you need to describe the kit that much, or is it just Atlanta United is attacking the goal?
Yeah, I think for me, like when I do games on a stream, especially whether it's a college game or a NPSL or summer league game or high school games that we've done, I try to mention who's on the ball as much as possible from a TV perspective when I'm doing play-by-play. I try to mention who is on the ball. So it becomes less descriptive and more identification at times. And that's maybe the balance that I try to strike between the Spanish language calls that I really enjoy and I love the passion, and I try to emulate that as much as I'm able to with, I think, what is accepted in English language and what's more common. Radio is a completely different animal, and I love radio, and I'm really lucky to work with Mike Conti on radio, who is just incredible at painting the picture. And when you listen to him, and I try to do it in games where I can, like I try to kind of close my eyes and listen to him describe what's happening, and I know what's going on. When I open my eyes back up, I know exactly what's going on the field. He's so good at the where, the who, the what, like those things. He nails it, and that's such a key with radio to paint that picture in your mind. I try to color in the gaps, and I try to get a lot of the why and the how and the emotion. And that's been a big thing that I've talked to with a lot of commentators over the last year, is calling games from empty venues has been the weirdest thing. And it's been really weird for us in Atlanta, where we're so used to hearing the 17s and how loud it gets. And you have to lay out at times because you can't yell over it. And then you go to the reverse. And I did a game on TV last year, and it's so eerie at times because you get used to expecting a roar from the crowd or a reaction from the crowd, and it doesn't happen. And you're kind of trying to figure out, like, well, how do I do this here? Do I want just dead air because I would normally lay out and the crowd would be going nuts? Or do I just keep going and trying to fill that space? And I don't know if there's a right answer. I mean, we're lucky now that hopefully we're not going to call too many more games behind closed doors ever again. I really hope we don't have to do that ever again. But it's a weird thing. And I think doing radio really helped me with that, because you have to fill space so much on radio.
Right.
There's nothing to lay out for except for crowd noise that you let go. But that's really momentary with radio. So I enjoy with Mike, because I think we do as strong of an English language style of Spanish language commentary. Like, we try to be very passionate. We try to be emotional and capture that side of it. From a very Atlanta United perspective for radio, because I think radio lends itself to that more than TV does, which is a different feel. I grew up listening to Larry Munson call Georgia football. I grew up listening to Steve Holman call the Atlanta Hawks. I think if you've grown up listening to sports on the radio in this region, you kind of expect I think Homer gets a negative connotation, but
Right.
from a radio perspective, and it's not a national radio call. I mean, we're the Atlanta United radio call.
Right.
I think it'd be out of place if we tried to do it any other way. And yeah, we get upset about things and we get excited about things, and we have fun with it, but it's definitely a very Atlanta call. And what's been, pretty cool to hear is, when we get simulcast on Sirius XM FC, for example, they've never said anything to us about the way we call games or anything. They keep picking our games because they know, one, it's generally going to be an entertaining game because that's what Atlanta tries to do, but also they know the way we call the game. And some people love it. Some people probably don't like it if it's their team that we're playing against, but they listen even if they don't like it, because then they kind of start rooting against us. You know what I mean? So it's getting that passion about it. I love listening to hometown calls because it captures something that I think a completely straight neutral call just can't a lot of times.
So Jason, going back to bringing in young talent in kind of current events, there's a little bit of rumor out there around Ezequiel Barco's teammate, Thiago Almata. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I think Philippe was reporting on that today that maybe we're close to a deal there. Is there any truth to that? And do we think a player like that is needed right now on the team?
The reports out of Argentina are that it's a very, very close to a deal, although there are some more recent reporting that Marseille and France is coming back in to try to get him. He had been linked with Marseille, I want to say, in the last month or two, and it didn't happen. Marseille went into some different signings, and the French league's kind of weird right now in terms of revenues. They're struggling a bit, but Marseille and PSG have spent money in the summer window and other clubs have not. So I don't know how much more money Marseille has to spend, and I don't know if they really need Almada at this point. Atlanta does. I think he's a player who, people have maybe tried to paint him as the next Ezequiel Barco, the next Marcelino Moreno. Like, he's different to me in that he's more of a natural goal scorer than those two. Those are two guys who can score goals, but didn't score a lot in Argentina. Almada, in 50 starts in all competitions, has 20 goals, 80 games coming off the bench included. So he's a guy who hasn't always been in scoring positions. He's played on the wing some. He's played as a central attacking midfielder, but he has a nose for goal. I like what I've seen of him. He's a player that I'm familiar with, but I'm not like fully researched on. The way I could see him fitting is as one of those central attacking midfielders, even playing as a withdrawn forward at times. You could go 3-5-2 with him as a second forward. You could play him in the 4-3-3 that we've seen a lot this year. He could play out wide at times against certain opponents too. And with the interplay of guys like Barco and Moreno and Almada, you've got three guys who all of them can pop up as wingers. All of them can pop up in scoring situations at the top of the 18 and into the 18. So it'd be really interesting to see. Probably going to take a pretty significant investment to get him. And the question would be, from a cap perspective, and we don't know how much cap space there is, can you make it work? He's age eligible for the U22 initiative. The question would be the salary. And I think they could find a way to make it work because, it's all misunderstood how much guys are paid in Argentina and in South America in general. And the salaries are not huge, especially for a young player like Almada, who's just turned 20. He's probably not on a ton of money at the moment. So you could give him a hugely significant raise and still keep him under that threshold to count as a U22 initiative player. And that'd be a masterstroke if you could pull it off, to get him to where he's only hitting 150,000 on your cap. But you can spend whatever you need to on the transfer fee and keep his salary within whatever constraints they have. Be fascinating to see if they can do it. He's an incredibly talented player that a lot of people thought would be in Europe by now.
But there's two aspects of that, right? So one is obviously the money involved and all the MLS complicated rules. But the other aspect of it is, if he comes, he's clearly coming to play here and try to move on to Europe, a la Almiron. Right. And my question is, with Barco, Moreno, Joseph Martinez as the guys who are naturally in his position, where is the playing time going to be? I mean, obviously, we've really lacked for someone to back up Joseph Martinez, but it doesn't seem like you're going to buy a young hotshot from South America to back up Joseph Martinez. So does that imply that one of those players would be on the move?
Change of formation or?
Not necessarily, because I think you can play all three of them, four if you want to include Joseph in the conversation, in a variety of formations. Okay. We've seen 4-3-3 as the base this year, and I don't think that'll really deviate too much as we go. Barco can play as a left winger. Moreno and Almata can play as the two central midfielders in that behind Joseph. Moreno could go out wide, and Barco could come inside if you wanted to. You could play a 3-5-2 with Almata as a second forward, kind of playing withdrawn off of Joseph, with Barco and Moreno behind him. There's different ways to make it work. And I'll be curious to see how you find the right chemistry with that group. It's good that Almata and Barco are playing together on the Argentine Olympic team right now. I think Moreno's a guy who can build chemistry with players around him. I think also, you have to factor in that there's a chance, and I think it's maybe a little slim at the moment because we haven't heard any rumors on it, but there's a chance that Ezequiel Barco is sold in this window.
Right.
He's coming towards the end of his contract. I think there's another year on it past this current season. And, you want to get a deal done with him before he gets into that point where he can sign on a free and leave on a pre-contract kind of situation. So if he, attracts attention after the Olympics, he could be here for just a very short period of time after the Olympics before moving on, or he could finish the year out here and then move on ahead of next season.
Yeah, the timing strikes me, with him being at the Olympics as a showcase. That's if there would be a time to attract interest and maybe get a little higher offer, it might be coming off of that.
It's possible. And I've wondered how that would play out, because the Olympics will be over if Argentina makes a run all the way to the final. It'd be over after the incoming window closes in MLS, which you could still sell, but you wouldn't be able to bring in a replacement immediately. Almata could be kind of a way you can bring in a replacement before he's gone officially and make it work. So there's some different ways to make this happen. And I think this is the kind of stuff that you bring in the new VP for, who has been on the competition committee and that side of things with MLS, and is going to know every way to stretch the salary cap and find that kind of space to make these things happen.
So Jason, want to be respectful of your time. One final question for you that we asked all the guests we have on the show. This was a little harder to answer the second part in 2018 when we started our podcast the year after we won. But what is your favorite thing about Atlanta United, and what's the thing you hate the most about the club or anything surrounding it right now? Kind of what's the best and most frustrating thing maybe?
Keep in mind that we invented this question when everything was going absolutely perfect and you couldn't find a thing to hate about Atlanta United. But go ahead.
What do I love the most? I love I can't even describe really the feeling it is. The last time I really felt it at Mercedes-Benz was Marcelino Moreno's late winter against Montreal.
Right.
There's a level of noise and it almost like knocks me back a step at times when the building gets to that point. And I've never had that at any other sporting event. You know, I
It
mean,
seems like pure joy.
yeah, it's such a unique feeling. And it can take on, depending on the moment, it can take on different feels. I mean,
Yeah.
the first time I felt it was the draw against Orlando in the last game at Bobby Dodd, the late goal from Tito Villalba to
Right.
equalize. And it was just a different feeling. It wasn't like a goal celebration feeling. It was something completely different. And when that happens, it's just special. It's like you want more of it. It's like a drug. Um, the thing that I hate the most is I think the misunderstanding that some people have outside of Atlanta about what Atlanta soccer is. And
Hmm.
at times it'll be people saying like, oh, they're plastic. That word gets thrown around a lot.
Right.
Or like, oh, it's an overnight success, or they're not really like big fans and stuff like that. It drives me crazy because there was a growing and thriving soccer community in Atlanta before Atlanta United. And it's one of the reasons that I think Atlanta United's been so successful, because it had those seeds that had been planted going all the way back to the Atlanta Chiefs days in the late 60s. So they had something to grow from. So it's not an overnight success. It's not anything like that, because it was happening here. This has taken it to a whole nother level. And I think Atlanta fans are the most invested fans in the league. And maybe it's just because of the size. Maybe it's just because of, the interactions that we all have with folks and in person and on social media, and just how passionate people are. I think there are a lot of fan bases that wish they had that kind of feeling. And yeah, there's times when it's not a fun feeling, when games are not getting the results you want, or there's a frustration about a player, or a tactic, or whatever. It can be overwhelming, and it can, yeah, it cannot be fun. But if you don't have that passion, that interest, that just that movement, when those good times happen, you don't get that feeling that we talked about. That doesn't happen. So you have to be able to take both sides of it. And I think, I'm always reminded of Glenn Davis in Houston. Great commentator, calls Houston Dynamo games. He's on ESPN and FS1 a lot during the season as well. Every time I get a chance to catch up with him on his radio show, he always, before we go on, he's like, I am so envious of you, because there's always something to talk about with Atlanta United. Like, there's always something going on, and people want every little morsel of it.
Right.
And in Houston, like, he does that, trying to get people excited. And it's a struggle, because there's not as much going on, and there's not that movement behind it. So we're really lucky to have both sides of it.
It seemed like John Gallagher gave Austin FC a little bit of that moment with their first goal. It seemed like there was a really good vibe happening for the fans there. I was actually really happy for them in a way to be able to experience that same kind of drug, like you're saying.
I can't wait to get out there and see that venue. I can't wait to get up to Columbus here in a few weeks and see their new stadium. Minnesota, I think, will be the last one on the list that we haven't been to the new stadium. When we were in Minnesota, they were still at the University of Minnesota. And then Charlotte next year, I think Charlotte will be pretty special. I really do. I think it's going to be an exciting, rivalry between these two. But, it comes back to, you talk about a feeling, being in Orlando on Friday. That's a different kind of vibe, but it is a special one to be in that stadium for, because there's a lot of animosity from Orlando fans towards anything related to Atlanta. And we get our share of those comments said to us while we're on the radio, and certain fingers thrown in our direction at times. So, but that's that vibe. That's that kind of rush you get sometimes.
We never talk about Orlando on this podcast. Never.
We got a little bit this week, though.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for your time, and we know you got a busy week preparing for the win over at Orlando, right? Are you traveling down there?
Yeah, we'll be heading down on Thursday, and really looking forward to calling that one from the venue. And yeah, looking forward to getting yelled at a little bit by their fans.
Yeah, awesome.
Right on.
Well, Jason, I appreciate you joining again, and have a great week, and give us some great color commentary for the win in Orlando.
We'll do our best. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
All right, Jason, take care, man.
You too.